This incident occurred approximately 3 years ago, just a few days before Christmas. Specifically, it was December 20th. I was living alone at the time in a rental house just outside of town. It wasn't exactly in the middle of nowhere, but the houses were spaced out enough that if you screamed, your neighbors probably wouldn't hear you unless their windows were open. And since it was winter, nobody's windows were open. I've always been the type of person who checks the locks 3 times before bed. I'm cautious, but nothing prepares you for something like this. I came home from work around 4:30 p.m. It was already getting dark because of the season. As I walked up the porch steps, I saw a package sitting on the welcome mat. It was a medium-sized box wrapped in plain brown paper. No bow, no holiday print, and weirdly, no shipping label. I picked it up. It felt light. My first thought was that my mom had dropped it off. She lives about an hour away and is famous for dropping off early Christmas gifts without telling anyone. She's terrible at waiting for the actual day. I figured she drove by while I was at work, left it, and forgot to text me. I brought the box inside, kicked off my boots, and locked the door behind me. I took the box into the kitchen and grabbed a pair of scissors. I wasn't scared at all. Why would I be? I was actually smiling, wondering what kind of random gift my mom had bought this time. I cut the tape and opened the flaps. Inside, there was a layer of bubble wrap. I pulled that away and saw a simple black wooden picture frame. I turned it over to see the picture, expecting a family photo or maybe a picture of my dog. My stomach dropped. The smile vanished from my face instantly. It was a photograph of me. In the picture, I was standing at my kitchen sink washing dishes. I was wearing the same gray hoodie I had worn the night before. I could see the steam rising from the hot water. The angle was from outside, taken through the kitchen window. The darkness of the yard framed the shot. I stood there frozen, gripping the frame. My brain tried to make sense of it. Who took this? The picture was high quality. It wasn't blurry. Someone had stood in my backyard, right up against the glass, and taken a photo of me while I was completely unaware, listening to music and scrubbing a pan. Suddenly, the silence in the house felt heavy. My cell phone, which I had set on the counter next to the box, began to ring. The sound was so loud in the quiet kitchen that I actually jumped. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. Usually, I don't answer those, but my thumb hit the green button before I could stop myself. I put the phone to my ear, not saying a word. For 3 seconds, there was just silence. Then a heavy, wet sound, breathing. It sounded like someone trying to catch their breath in the cold air. A deep, scratchy male voice spoke. "Did you like it?" My blood ran cold. I hung up immediately. I didn't say anything back. I dropped the phone and scrambled to check the back door. It was locked. I checked the front door again. Locked. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt exposed. I grabbed my phone again to dial 911. Crash. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the kitchen. I screamed and dropped to the floor, covering my head. Cold air rushed into the room. I looked up. The very window where the photo had been taken, the one above the sink, was shattered. There was glass all over the counter and the floor. Lying in the middle of the kitchen floor, amidst the shards of glass, was a rock about the size of a baseball. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. I knew I had to get out of the kitchen, but I couldn't stop staring at the rock. There was a piece of notebook paper secured to it with a rubber band. I shouldn't have gone near it. I should have run straight to the bedroom and locked the door, but curiosity or maybe shock took over. I crawled forward and grabbed the rock. I pulled the paper off and unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged and messy. It read, "I have more." Panic fully set in. I ran out of the kitchen and into the hallway, away from the broken window. I dialed 911, my fingers fumbling over the numbers. 911. "What is your emergency?" "Someone is at my house," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They threw a rock through my window. They're watching me." "Okay, ma'am, I have officers dispatched. Are you in a safe place?" "I'm in the hallway." "Everything is locked. Stay on the line with me." As I huddled in the hallway, clutching the phone, a horrifying thought hit me. The note said, "I have more pictures." My phone buzzed against my ear. It wasn't a call. It was a text message from a blocked number. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a split second to look. It was an image file. I opened it. Tears started stinging my eyes. The photo wasn't taken from outside. This photo was taken from inside my bedroom. It showed me sleeping in my bed. The timestamp on the photo was from 3:00 a.m. This morning. He hadn't just been outside. He had been in my house. While I was asleep, he had stood over my bed, taken a picture, and left without me ever knowing. "Ma'am, are you there?" the dispatcher asked. He was inside. I choked out. "He has a picture of me sleeping." Then I heard it, the sound of snow crunching. It wasn't coming from the backyard this time. It was coming from the front porch. Heavy boots are stepping onto the wooden planks. The floorboards creaked. He wasn't running away. He was coming to the front door. I scrambled backward, retreating up the stairs, trying to put as much distance between me and the door as possible. The door knob to the front door rattled violently. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. He was shaking the door, testing the deadbolt. "He's at the door." I cried into the phone, "Please hurry. They are 2 minutes out, ma'am." 2 minutes is a lifetime when someone is trying to break in. The rattling stopped. For a second I thought maybe he had given up. Then a heavy thud hit the door. He was throwing his body weight against it. The wood groaned. I saw the door frame shudder. I ran into the bathroom at the top of the stairs and locked the door. It was the only room with no windows large enough for a person to fit through. I sat in the empty bathtub, pulling the shower curtain closed, clutching a bottle of bleach I kept under the sink as a weapon. Downstairs I heard a loud crack as the wood of the front door frame finally gave way. The sound of heavy boots on my hardwood floor echoed up the stairs. I held my breath, clamping my hand over my mouth to stop my sobbing. "He wasn't rushing. He was walking slowly. I know you like the pictures," the voice called out. It was coming from the bottom of the stairs. It was the same voice on the phone. "I want to take one more, just one more, face to face." I heard his foot hit the first step of the stairs. Then sirens. Blue and red lights flashed against the bathroom tiles, shining through the small ventilation window. The wail of the sirens was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. I heard the intruder run back toward the kitchen. I heard the back door get kicked open, followed by police shouting, "Police, show me your hands." I stayed in that bathtub for another 10 minutes until a female officer knocked on the bathroom door and told me it was safe to come out. They never caught him. They found footprints leading from my back door into the woods behind the property, but the tracks disappeared onto a plowed road about a mile away. They did a sweep of my house. They found something that made me move out the very next day. In my bedroom closet, hidden behind my winter coats, they found a small sleeping bag and empty food wrappers. The police estimated he had been living in my closet for at least 3 days, watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep so he could come out. The package on the porch was just his way of letting me know that the game was starting. I live in an apartment complex now, 3rd floor. I have cameras in every room, but sometimes when I'm washing dishes and it's dark outside, I can't bring myself to look at the window. I'm too afraid of what I might see looking back. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. When I was 10 years old, my life was completely flipped upside down. My parents split up, and for reasons I didn't really understand at the time, I had to move in with my dad. I went from living in a busy neighborhood where I knew every kid on the block to a quiet, spread out suburb where I didn't know a single soul. The transition was rough. My dad tried his best, but he worked a lot. So I spent a good amount of time just wandering around the house or sitting on the front porch, bored out of my mind. The only saving grace was that my dad was already friends with a family that lived just down the street. It was a single mom with 3 kids, Luckily for me, the middle child was a girl named Ashley. She was 2 years older than me, 12 at the time, which feels like a huge age gap when you're a kid, but she was nice enough to let me hang around. We weren't exactly best friends or anything. It was more like a friendship out of convenience. Our parents were friends, so we got stuck together at barbecues or dinners. Over the next couple of years, though, the gap between our ages felt smaller, and we ended up sharing the same circle of friends in the neighborhood. By the time I was 12 and Ashley was 14, things were pretty normal. We had a solid group of kids we hung out with. One of those kids was my good friend Rob. This all happened a week before Christmas. The atmosphere in the neighborhood was actually really nice. Everyone had their lights up. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, and we were all just waiting for school to let out for winter break. One night, Ashley's mom was working a late shift. She was a social worker or a counselor of some kind. I never knew the official title, just that she helped people who were going through really hard times. Because she was working, Ashley and her younger brother, who was about 9, were home alone. My friend Rob went over there to hang out. Now, looking back, I know Rob probably had a crush on Ashley. He wasn't really supposed to be there when her mom wasn't home. Parents in our neighborhood were strict about boys and girls hanging out unsupervised. So the plan was for him to leave before her mom's car pulled into the driveway. I was at my dad's house, probably playing video games, completely unaware of what was happening down the street. According to Rob, they were just sitting in the living room watching TV. Ashley's little brother was in the other room playing with some toys. It was around 8:00 p.m. when they heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't just a regular knock, though. Ashley's mom had this specific rhythm she would use when she forgot her keys or just wanted them to open the door for her. It was like a couple of taps. When Ashley heard that specific rhythm, she jumped up. She looked at Rob with wide eyes. They both panicked, thinking her mom was home early and Rob was about to get busted. Without thinking twice, Rob scrambled toward the back of the house. He opened the window in the laundry room, squeezed through it, and dropped into the backyard. He sprinted through the snow, cut through the neighbor's yard, and ran all the way to his house down the road. He told me later that he felt relieved. He thought he had made a clean escape. He went into his room, caught his breath, and probably played PlayStation for the rest of the night, thinking everything was fine. But it wasn't Ashley's mom at the door. Ashley, thinking the coast was clear and that her mom was waiting in the cold, unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. It wasn't her mother. Standing on the porch was a woman Ashley had never seen before. From what the police pieced together later, this woman was the sister of a lady Ashley's mom had been helping through her job. Ashley's mom had been working closely with a client who had severe mental health issues. That client had a sister who had recently been released from a mental institution. Somehow, this woman had become obsessed with the social worker helping her sister. She blamed Ashley's mom for something. Maybe for interfering with her family, or maybe it was just a delusion. Nobody really knows the logic, but she had stalked Ashley's mom. She figured out her work schedule. She figured out where she lived. And terrifyingly, she had watched the house long enough to learn the secret knock Ashley's mom used. When Ashley opened that door, the woman forced her way inside. I don't know exactly what happened in the hallway, and I'm glad I don't, but Ashley's younger brother heard the commotion. He peeked out from the other room and saw a stranger attacking his sister. He didn't scream. He was smart. He ran out the back door, the same general direction Rob had gone, and pounded on the next door neighbor's door until they answered. They called 911 immediately. I remember waking up to the sound of siren. It wasn't just one siren. It sounded like every police car in the county was on our street. My dad ran into my room and told me to stay away from the windows, but of course I looked. The street was lit up with red and blue flashing lights. It was blinding against the white snow. I saw an ambulance, but it wasn't in a hurry to leave. That's usually a bad sign. The details didn't come out until a few days later. It's hard to even type this out because it feels like a nightmare, but it was real. The woman had brutally murdered Ashley, but she didn't just kill her. She did things that I can't wrap my head around. When the police entered the house, they found the woman sitting in the living room just waiting. She didn't fight them. They found Ashley's body in the bathroom. The woman had dragged her there and put her in the bathtub completely naked. And the worst part, the part that made my dad throw up when he heard it, was that the woman had decapitated her. The police couldn't find Ashley's head initially. The house was decorated for Christmas with a tree in the corner and presents piled underneath it. The police had to search through the scene, and that's where they found it. The woman had wrapped Ashley's head and hidden it among the Christmas presents under the tree. I remember the feeling in the pit of my stomach when I heard that. It was sick. It was twisted. It felt like something from a slasher movie, not something that happens to the girl you grew up living down the street from. Rob was a mess. He kept saying I should have stayed. If I hadn't run out the window, maybe I could have fought her off. Maybe Ashley would still be here. He carried that guilt for years. But the truth is, if Rob had opened that door, or if he had been standing there when the woman came in, there would have just been two bodies in that house instead of one. The woman had a large hunting knife and the element of surprise. Rob was just a kid. There was nothing he could have done. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. My dad said it would be too much for me, and honestly, he was probably right. They had a closed casket. Obviously, Christmas that year was canceled in our house. We didn't put up lights. We didn't open gifts. It just didn't feel right. I've never told this story to anyone. Not my wife, not my brother, and definitely not the police. I kept my mouth shut because I had to. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't worth the risk, especially when you have a family. This happened 4 years ago. It was early December. My wife Katie wanted a real Christmas tree that year. Usually, we just went to the Home Depot lot, bought a pre-cut fir, and strapped it to the roof. But that year, Katie saw something on Instagram about going into the national forest and cutting your own tree. She thought it would be a nice tradition. I agreed, but because of our work schedules, I couldn't go on the weekend. So I decided to take a half day off work on a Tuesday and go get one myself to surprise her and my daughter Lee, who was 5 at the time. I drove my Ford up into the mountains. In our state, you can buy a $10 permit to cut a tree in specific areas. I drove past the main designated areas because they looked picked over. I wanted a really good one. I found a dirt service road that wound deeper into the woods. It was legally part of the cutting zone just further out. It was about 3:30 p.m. when I parked. The sun sets early in the mountains, so the light was already getting that gray flat look. The air was freezing, probably around 20 degrees. I grabbed my handsaw and a pair of work gloves, locked the truck, and walked into the tree line. It was quiet, too quiet. The snow was about 6 in deep, making a loud crunch with every step I took. I walked for maybe 15 minutes until I found a clearing. There it was, a perfect noble fir about 7 ft tall. I knelt and started sawing. It takes a lot more effort to cut down a fresh tree than people think. I was sweating and breathing hard. The saw was loud, rhythmically grinding against the wood. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a twig snapping. It was the sound of snow compressing. Crunch. I stopped sawing. The noise stopped immediately. Hello. I called out. Nothing. Just the wind blowing through the pine needles. I figured it was another person looking for a tree or maybe a deer. I went back to sawing, but faster this time. I felt a weird prickling on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when you just know eyes are on you. I cut through the last bit of the trunk and the tree toppled over. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed the trunk and started dragging it back toward the road. Dragging a tree through snow is exhausting. I had to stop to catch my breath. I looked back at the tree line I had just come from. About 50 yards back, behind a thick cluster of spruce trees, I saw a shape. It was dark, contrasting against the white snow. It ducked behind a trunk the second I turned my head. It wasn't an animal, it was tall. It was a person. Panic spiked in my chest. I didn't call out this time. I just gripped the tree harder and started walking faster. I heard the footsteps behind me again. They weren't trying to be stealthy anymore. They were heavy and fast. Someone was running. I abandoned the tree. I dropped it right there in the snow and sprinted the last 100 yards to the truck. My heart was hammering in my throat. I could hear the person behind me crashing through the brush, getting closer. I burst out of the tree and hit the service road. I fumbled for my keys, jamming the unlock button. I reached the driver's side door and grabbed the handle. That's when I saw it. My truck was leaning weirdly to the left. I looked down. Both tires on the driver's side were completely flat, slashed. The rubber was shredded. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. I had been set up. I didn't have time to process it. I heard the crunching of snow from the woods, but also from the road. "Hey," a voice shouted. I spun around. 3 men were walking toward me from further up the road. They were dressed in heavy camo jackets and dark jeans, but the terrifying part was their faces. They were all wearing black ski masks. I looked back toward the woods. The person who had been chasing me stepped out. He was also wearing a mask. I was surrounded. "Look, take the truck," I stammered, holding up my keys. "Take whatever you want." The biggest guy, the one who came from the road, didn't say a word. He just rushed me. I tried to fight back, but it was useless. He tackled me into the side of my truck. My head hit the metal hard. Stars exploded in my vision. Before I could recover, the others were on me. It wasn't a fight, it was a beatdown. They kicked my ribs and punched me in the face. I curled into a ball in the snow, trying to protect my head. "Grab him," one of them growled. 2 of them hauled me up and slammed me against the truck door. My nose was bleeding freely, dripping onto my jacket. The big guy stood in front of me. He reached into my pocket and ripped out my wallet and my phone. "Unlock the phone," he said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Why?" I gasped. He punched me in the stomach. I doubled over, wheezing. "Unlock it." Shaking, I used my thumbprint to unlock the screen. He snatched it back. He started scrolling. He wasn't looking for banking apps. He was looking at my photos. Then he opened my notes app. Then he opened my contacts. He held up my wallet. He pulled out my driver's license. "Robert," he read my name out loud. Then he read my address. He looked back at the phone. He turned the screen toward me. It was a picture I had taken of Lee on her first day of kindergarten, standing in front of the school sign. "Cute kid." Man said, "Lee Wright goes to Creekwood Elementary." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "Please," I begged, "please just take the money. Don't hurt them." The man stepped closer, leaning in so his mask was inches from my face. I could smell stale tobacco on his breath. "We're keeping the phone in the wallet," he said, "and you're going to stay here until we're long gone. You aren't going to call a tow truck for at least an hour. And when you do, you're going to tell them you hit something sharp on the road." He grabbed the collar of my jacket. "If you go to the cops, if you tell them about the masks, if you give them a description," gestured to the phone in his hand, "we know where you sleep. We know where Lee goes to school. We know what time she gets let out at the bus stop." He paused, letting the silence hang there. "Do you understand me, Robert?" "Yes, I understand." "Good." He shoved me down into the snow. They turned around, walked down the service road to a rusted SUV I hadn't noticed parked in the brush, and drove off. I lay in the snow for 20 minutes, terrified they would come back if I moved. Eventually I got up. I was freezing, bruised, and bleeding. My truck was useless. I had to walk 3 miles down the mountain to get cell service. I flagged down a passing car, a nice older couple. When I used their phone to call the police, no, I called my wife. I told her I had a blowout and slid into a ditch. I told her I lost my phone in the snow while trying to dig the truck out. When I got home that night, I hugged Lee so hard she complained I was squeezing her. We moved 3 months later. I told my wife I got a job offer in a different state, but that was a lie. I just quit. I couldn't stand living in that house anymore, knowing that somewhere out there, 3 men knew exactly where my daughter slept. I never canceled the credit cards immediately. I waited a day just to make sure they didn't think I was acting too fast. I never reported the assault. I was 22 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house. who died of the heroin overdose in 2013 before his death. He would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to New York every year to attend their own friend's party. He was always a big Halloween freak, so the whole house was with truly horrifying props that we all knew Nick spent way too much money on. He even put up giant walls of cardboard and covered them with wallpapers to create a haunted maze of sorts. I want to keep this story PG-13 rated, so I'll skip the weed, beer, LSD, and sex and get right to the part where things got bad. I'll admit we weren't in our right minds. None of us were. Anyone who came to Nick's parties knew what went down. Me, Nick, and a few other guys, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in Nick's room smoking a bong when we heard two steady, loud bangs come from downstairs. Nick clumsily but panicking rushed to open the door and see what was going on. There were sounds of screaming of both guys and girls. I remember quite clearly. It sounded as if there were a crowd of people screaming for their lives down there. We all called Nick to come back in and shut the door. Even under the influence of drugs, we all knew what was going on. Nick ran back inside and shut the door quickly, but also quietly locking it behind him. He turned to us and had on the facial expression of someone who had just witnessed murder. "What did you see? What's going on?" We all shouted at him. He told us to hide before anything else. We all knew why. From that point on, we didn't ask questions. Nick hit the lights and hid in the closet with Joey, while I hid under the bed with Q, and Vinny G hid in the storage box. We could hear the blasting music from downstairs turn off, followed by a grown man screaming at everyone to shut up. One unfortunate girl let out a scream of shock and fear, and after another bang silence, the man started shouting at everyone again. But personally, I couldn't hear it too well, and I certainly as hell wouldn't remember exactly what he was shouting. We heard two other men shouting. By now there were a confirmed 3 intruders in the house, but there could have been more for all we knew at that point. We heard the sound of boots stomping up the stairs and then coming halfway down the hall and stopping outside the bedroom door. Intruder on the other side of the door tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he started ramming into the door with most likely his shoulder. After a few failed attempts at that, the sound of a few shots to the doorknob were clearly enough to break the lock, allowing the door to swing open. We heard cries from downstairs after the shots to the doorknob, followed by silence and gunshot. Me and Nick had our hands on our mouth to shield our breathing noises. I watched through the transparent cloth that hung from the bottom of Nick's bed as the black boots with overlapping ripping denim jeans moved instinctively to the closet. He opened the door. I could hear Nick begging for the intruder not to kill him, offering a generous amount of money if they would leave. Nick gave himself up as the house owner. That's when the intruder ordered him downstairs. The rest of us stayed put. Apparently Joey hadn't been caught with Nick. We stayed under the bed, shaking and afraid. There was near silence from downstairs other than Nick talking with the intruders, but whatever they were saying was much too low for us to hear. It felt like a near 20 minutes before the front door slammed shut and Nick came running back upstairs to tell us that they were gone. I think the most horrifying moment of my life was when I stepped downstairs back into the living room and saw the 2 dead bodies laying lifelessly on the ground, hole in their heads, spewing out blood. Jen and Robbie, 2 good friends that I still miss. I'll spare you the details of what happened when the police arrived, but despite the fact that the house smelt like a marijuana greenhouse, the police were more interested in finding out who the masked men were that killed 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nicky told the 4 of us who were hiding in his room that there were 4 intruders in total, all wearing fedoras, vendetta masks, coats, and gloves. They demanded 100,000 in cash, and when Nick could not provide it, they demanded he fill their empty sack with his most valued possessions. All the partygoers held hostage in the room were also forced to throw their wallets into the sack where they would be shot. After the incident, Nick became depressed. He started drinking too much, becoming an alcoholic. He stopped showing up to school and ultimately ended up dropping out. He started the use of heavier drugs such as meth and heroin. I had one good talk with him since the incident, and he was more real during this talk than he had ever been. He told me with tears rolling down his cheeks and a pipe in his hand, he lived in constant pain, knowing he caused the death of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, not even a year after the incident. It was my first Halloween living in my own house, away from my parents. I live in a small corner house with a basement, but no upstairs, a house my parents paid half, for it was 11:00 at night. I was sitting in the living room watching scary Halloween movies when I found myself getting up to answer a knock at the door, but then I stopped and thought, who could be at the door at 11:00 p.m.? Surely there were no more trick-or-treaters out. I had a pretty good feeling it was a late-night Halloween ding-dong ditcher, so I gave it a second. Then I shot a glance to the porch through the window. They were gone already. Yep, ding-dong ditchers. I sat back down, not thinking twice about it, and again knocking at the front door. Get lost, I yelled. I was not in the mood for punky kids. They ignored my demands and started pounding. Now, not just knocking. I was pissed. Now I leaped up and swung the door open. No one was there once again. I slipped on my shoes and headed outside to began searching bushes for the kids, but there was nobody in sight. Not in the bushes, not behind my car, not across the street. I was done answering. I didn't want to feed into their fun anymore. So I went back inside, double-locked the door, and went to my bedroom, also locking that door, just to feel safer, I guess. Even over the TV I could still hear the stupid kids pounding on my front door repeatedly. I was so close to calling the cops to get them away, but that would undoubtedly lead to my house being egged or TP'd. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long time, more than half an hour. I thought the kids must be filming something for YouTube and were desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't going to give it to them at some point. I dozed off with the TV on, only to wake up to the knocking again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the morning. How could those kids still be at it? I thought. I turned the TV off and sat up with my ears open for a few moments. My heart completely stopped as I realized the knocking was not at my front door, but rather at my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, looking around my room like a madman for something to use as a weapon. They knew I was awake. Now they were trying the door knob, trying to bust down the door. These weren't any kids. By some miracle, I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I could think of. I turned on the receiver to my speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, brought up the YouTube app, typed in 45 gunshot sound effect, turned on the volume and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot echoed out of the speakers. It sounded real enough. I paused the video after the first shot and yelled, "That was a warning shot. Leave now, or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And it worked. I heard 2 pairs of footsteps ping over my wood floors and out the front door. I gave it a moment before opening my bedroom door and peeking outside. They were gone, but the front door was left wide open. I quickly shut it, called the police, and that's where my story ended. So I was never really a big Halloween person, mostly because I grew up without many friends, and once I passed the age of 10, I couldn't use the excuse of going with my mom anymore, and it's not like I had friends to go with. So this last Halloween I was 14 years old. I do have a little sister who's only 8, so my mom went trick-or-treating with her. My one really good friend, Steve, already had plans, and I didn't want to impose, so it didn't seem like I'd be trick-or-treating this year. I felt a tiny part of me explode with happiness on the inside when my mom asked me to stay home and hand out candies. Now I felt like I had a job to do that didn't involve me trick-or-treating alone like a loser. My mom left with my sister at about 6:00, about an hour after she got home from work. She told me to expect her back around 9:00, so I was relaxing on the couch in the living room, watching the scary movie marathon on AMC, and occasionally answering the door to give candy to the kiddies. And while doing that, the kitchen phone began to ring. I remember the ringer was set so loud, it actually made me jump. I picked up the phone, and the other end remained silent, except for a bit of fumbling and background noises, sounds you'd expect when somebody's holding a phone. I think I said hello about 5 times before the person on the other end hung up. I just knew it was somebody pulling a Halloween prank call on me. What else could I do but ignore it? That worked well enough for the next few minutes of watching TV, answering the phone, until the phone rang again saying, "Unknown number coming up on the caller ID." I wanted to see where this was going, so I picked it up once more. This time I could hear a very faint breathing on the other end. "All right, Steve, I know it's you," I said into the phone. They hung up by this point. I didn't want to say I was scared, but I was For sure a bit uneasy. It was a long time before that phone rang again. It was getting later, darker, and the doorbell seemed to be ringing less and less. I was watching the original Friday the 13th. When it happened again, the sound of that phone ringing had become sickening, as I knew who it would be. Rather, I didn't. For some reason I gave in again and picked up, and once again silence other than the faint breathing and fumbling of the phone. It was like this for almost half a minute before they finally spoke in an exaggerated deep voice. "I'll be paying you a visit tonight. I had enough of this joke." I told them to off and hang up the phone, promising to myself not to pick it up again. I'd say about half an hour later, out of the blue, all the power in the house was cut. The lights went out, the TV turned off, complete darkness. I stood up, now frozen in fear, when loud and angry thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it and began screaming like a girl, but there was something coming from outside. Laughter. I recognized that laughter. I opened the door, and there he was, Stephen. I shoved him nearly down the steps out of anger. "So that was you who made those dumb phone calls?" I asked. He nodded while laughing. "I didn't sound like you on the phone. Let me hear you do that voice again," I said. What he seemed confused. "I didn't say anything, you idiot. I just called and did that heavy breathing." I thought he was lying at first, but then my heart dropped. I had him follow me to the fuse box. Outside, just as I feared, it had been opened and all the wires had been snipped. I think we ran faster than any Olympic champions back into the house. I called my mom, who told us to stay inside and wait for the police, who she then called. The call was traced to a pay phone at outside of a nearby bar. I still wonder, was this just a dumb Halloween prank gone too far? Or was it a potential break-in, and God knows what else waiting to music happen? I don't think I ever want to find music out. When I was younger, my friends and I went trick-or-treating every year. This one particular year, as we were trick-or-treating, we passed a man who stood still with a mask on, holding a lantern. As we walked past him, he turned his whole body around and followed us with his eyes. We were creeped out, but there were plenty of people around, so we made our way to the next house, my friends, and I saw him over and over again as we made our way from house to house, and he seemed to be following us in typical horror story form. We walked so slow we couldn't figure out how he kept up with us. At one house, when we hadn't seen him for a while, we got our candy. As we turned around to walk back to the street, masked man stood in the road waiting for us. Immediately we knocked back on the door and told the owners of the house about it. The masked man continued walking down the street, and we didn't see him again that night. Later on, an adult friend of the family told us he saw a masked man hiding behind a tree waving little kids over, and he only backed off when he threatened to call the police. I was trick-or-treating with my friend Casey. We were both 11 years old. At the time, we were walking across a small wooden bridge over a small river that many call Jack Winkle River, when a black Jeep pulled up on the other side of the bridge, basically blocking our way. We turned around and hurried away. We were the types of kids to obey the stranger danger rules. We could hear the windows of the Jeep rolling down, and a man with a raspy smoker's voice called for us to come back. He was yelling for help, asking us for directions. I yelled sorry, and we continued to hurry away. The Jeep couldn't fit over that small bridge, so it pulled away and drove down the road on the other side. We thought we had made our escape from the creepy driver, when here came an SUV barreling around the corner and down the street, slamming on the brakes in front of us once again. The driver rolled down the windows. Now with them right next to us, we could see there were 2 passengers in the car, as well an old guy with gray curly hair and a mustache in the back seat, who also had a raspy smoker's voice. Told us to get in the car, that they have free bags of candy. The Jeep banged a 3-point turn and tailed us wherever we went. At one point, the Jeep finally accelerated past us, came to a stop, and the back and front passenger side doors opened, and the 2 creepy men stepped out, lunging at us. We dropped our bags of candy and ran straight for my house, which was in sight now. We rang the doorbell desperately, at least 20 times. The old men that were chasing us couldn't run fast, and when they saw us running to my house, they turned back. My mom opened the door, and we screamed and pointed at the Jeep that was backing away in the other direction. She shoved us inside and locked the door and called the police like any mom would. She reported the black Jeep with 3 men inside, older-looking raspy voices, and any other descriptions we gave. My mom was freaking out all night, worried about the fact that they knew where we lived now. My dad tried to calm her, but she couldn't calm down. Ultimately, the police agreed to send an unmarked police car to stay out front and keep guard for 3 hours. That made my mom feel a little better. But what made us all feel better was when my dad woke us up to see the flashing red and blue lights outside of the unmarked police car. They had pulled over an SUV, a black Jeep, and 3 men were in cuffs, the 3 old creeps that tried to kidnap me. And Casey, my dad, went outside to talk to the officer, and most likely confirmed that those were the men. Me and Casey went to the doorway and screamed at the men for their attention. They looked, and we both gave them the finger. My mom then pulled us back in and shut the door, sending us to bed. It went from the worst night of both of our lives to ultimately the best night of our lives. This story took place on Halloween night. I took my 7-year-old daughter Jamie trick-or-treating for a few hours, and when we got back I cooked dinner, we watched TV together, and then I sent her to bed. I was feeling especially tired that night, so I brushed up and went to sleep. Shortly after, my daughter entered the room and told me there was someone in her closet. I assured her there was no one in her closet. She has to sleep with me, but I once again assured her that she was safe in her room. She reluctantly went back to her room and shut the door. I made a mental note that if she came back again, I would walk her to her closet and show her that there's no one in there. Surely enough, 5 minutes later she came back. I asked her why she thought there was someone in her closet. She responded, saying she heard someone and me moving around and things falling over. Honestly, when she said that, it kind of made my heart jump for a second. I walked her to her room and turned on the lights. I jokingly asked, "Is anybody in there?" We stood and listened. I didn't expect to hear anything there. It was a thud from inside the closet, and I screamed at Jamie to run to the neighbors and call the police. As she did, I swung the door open and was shocked to find the neighbor son Randy sitting on top of my daughter's Lego box. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and yanked him up aggressively. I walked him angrily back to his parents' house next door and found Jamie ringing the doorbell. When they answered, I shoved him inside right into his father and explained everything. I told him I wouldn't press charges, but if I ever caught him near my daughter again, they would all be sorry. Randy's dad, Mark, slapped him across the face, then asked me to come inside to allow Randy to explain himself. Me and Jamie both went inside. Apparently, while I was taking Jamie trick-or-treating, he had snuck into our house through an open window and hid in her closet with his friend Darryl. I asked him if this Darryl kid was still in my house. He said yes. I told Jamie to wait with Mark while I ran back into my house, and right as I entered there, he was this Darryl kid, uglier and shadier looking than Randy. He had my daughter's underwear in his hand. What I did next was completely out of fatherly protective anger. I grabbed the little by the throat and threw him to the floor, slapping him 4 times in the face, then hesitantly allowing him to get up and leave. The only reason I didn't call the police was because of my close friendship with Mark, but I made my point very strongly that if they ever so even waved to my daughter again, they would be in the news the next day. We went back to sleep. I let Jamie sleep with me after that incident. She was horrified. The next morning I found a small drill hole in her closet door. The sick little bastards were spying on my daughter while she slept, at the same time playing with her underwear. Maybe you don't understand the horror of the story unless you're a parent, but there are many days where I think I made a mistake not calling the police. I still can, but nothing has happened since, and I figure I shouldn't create more trouble now. Jim's 13 now, and that creep Randy has since gone away to college. We had just moved into our large new house in Mississauga, Ontario, in an area called Winston Church Hill. It was Halloween night, and my parents, my 4 other sisters, my brother, and I were unpacking our stuff in our new bedrooms. We had just finished and were talking to each other about leaving our old schools and friends behind. My mother called us to do chores. I was really tired since it was 11:30 at night, way past trick-or-treating buzz, and we had to do chores. Now it seemed to take forever, but when I was done, I decided to go to my bedroom and get some sleep. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the upstairs hallway, thinking it was my brother or sister. I got up to shout at them for bothering me while I was sleeping, but there, as far as I could tell, there was no one there. I rushed down to the basement where my parents' sister and brother were considerately working. I asked them all if they had been upstairs, and they replied no. Now I was getting pretty freaked out, but I had to believe it was just my imagination and shrugged it off as if it had never happened. I went back to my bed, which was now freezing cold. I had to put on a sweater. It was just too cold. I woke up in the middle of the night around 12:30 a.m. After everyone had gone to sleep, I heard this loud banging sound that seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. I thought it might be my brother or sister waiting to get a drink of water, but was too scared to go alone. I was wrong. The banging continued, getting louder by the minute. I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to check it out. I walked into the hallway, and believe me, there was no one there. As I walked in, the banging seemed to stop. I stared at the door only for a quick moment before deciding to go back to bed. After a couple of minutes, the banging started again. Now I was totally chilled to my very last bone. I tried to sleep again, but I couldn't. Very typical of me. The door to my bedroom creaked open as if someone were pushing it lightly, but it was too dark to see who or what could have cannot. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Who is it? Let me go back to sleep. Very light footsteps began to move closer to my bed. I thought it was one of my sisters until I turned onto my side after the footsteps stopped and saw a figure standing next to my bed, a figure at least 7 feet tall. I choked the urge to scream. Nothing came out. I lay there in unimaginable horror as the figure finally said boo. That was when I screamed at the top of my lungs and covered my eyes when my parents thrust open the door to my room and flicked on the light. There was no figure there. There was no figure by my bed. I cried out everything to them, the thumping, the figures. My siblings came into the doorway and watched me freak out. I asked my parents if they heard the knocking on their door. Surely they must have. It was their door after all. But they said there was no knocking, not that they knew of. They all looked at me like I was crazy. But I know I'm not. You can't just imagine something like that. Something so real. I'll never forget this night. I know I won't. It was a few years ago, Halloween night. We were all 20 years old. Right at that age, we're going to haunted house attractions. Is one of the best things to do on Halloween. The attraction was called Scariest Journey to the Basement something. It was only open for 4 straight years in our town. It was never heard of again. This was its 4th and final year of operation. It was a very high quality and surprisingly scary haunted house, one of the best ones I've been to. This was not a tour-guided attraction. It was a group exploration attraction, basically a maze where the only way out was to make your way to the basement, find one of the keys, then find the exit, and use the key you found to unlock the door. It was a very unique haunted house, that's for sure. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good night for us, and you're about to learn why. We started out in the living room of the house. To give as much detail as I can about the room, there was a giant open coffin sitting right smack in the middle of the room. There were very convincing spiderwebs covering just about every inch of every corner of the room. All the furniture was antique and dusty looking, and of course blood was stained on the creaky wood floor. We could tell right away this haunted house was going to be great. The next room was the dining room. That was where things got creepy. The rooms following the dining room were all very dimly lit by artificial lanterns hooked onto the walls. On several occasions, actors jumped out at us in horrifically convincing costumes, as expected, and yet they still got me every time. We actually spent a lot of time going in circles trying to find the basement. This wasn't a real wide open house. It was designed to be like a maze with many rooms and fake doors. It took a long time for us to finally find the basement door, and I have to admit I was nervous to go down there. It was completely pitch black down there. We started to think that it might have been an employees only area where they kept props. It was just too dark down there to see. It was stated many times that no cell phones were allowed while in the attraction, so we couldn't use cell phone screens as lights if we wanted to get out of there. We had no choice but to go down there. Each step created a creak more painful to the ears than fingernails scratching on a chalkboard. We were all laughing, telling each other how freaked out we were. I had my hands out in front of me, as if I was searching for anything in the complete darkness. I banged into somebody and apologized. Who was that? I asked, expecting it to be one of my friends. No answer. Whoever I just bumped into placed their hand on my shoulder, and I took off running and screaming, while at the same time laughing. There was something so disturbing about being in that huge pitch black basement, knowing someone was in there with us. One of my friends thankfully found a key on a desk in the corner of the room. We all ran back upstairs, back to the light, and found the exit door. The actual experience and process of getting through that maze of a haunted house was much longer than my story makes it out to be, but that's not where the things got horrifying. Right outside the exit door was a small bin with a sign that said "Drop keys here please." That's how the staff would collect the keys and bring them back down to the basement. Halfway off the premises of the haunted house, the exit door opened, and a really tall person dressed in a black robe and bloody pig mask stepped out and started following in our direction. He or a she, though it was most likely a he, so I'll refer to them as a he, appeared to be one of the staff members for the attraction. As we walked further away from the attraction, so did the guy in the costume. It seemed to all of us that he was following us. By this point, one of my friends called, "We don't have the key. If that's what you want." We dropped it in the little bin. But that didn't do the trick. As a joke, we started running just to see if he would too. And he did. We stopped, and so did he. We stood still, and so did he. At first it was funny, maybe it was just a joke. But as we got closer to my friend Eddie's house, we were starting to discuss if we should reveal where he lives to this guy. He had been following us for at least 5 blocks now, so if it was a joke, it had gone far enough. Eddie's parents were both home, so we felt safe to go inside. Apparently, Eddie's front door was broken, whatever that meant, so we had to go run back. We jokingly waved at the douchebag still following us, and walked to Eddie's backyard, shutting the gate behind us, wiping our feet on his welcome mat on the back door. We heard the gate open. The man emerged from behind the side of the house and began walking towards us once again, this time much faster. Eddie opened the back door and called to his dad, telling him to get his gun. This seemed to grab the masked man's attention. He slowed down, turned his head to face Eddie. Eddie's dad emerged angry as hell and aimed his pistol at the masked coward. He raised his hands up and cried out for him not to shoot, that he's only 27. Eddie's dad told him to get lost and never come back, and the next time he wouldn't think twice about pulling the trigger. Personally, I wish Eddie's dad had made the guy get on his knees and take off the mask, then call the police. That guy got off too easily. For all we know, he could have been armed as well. We contacted the haunted house attraction, and they informed us that they had no such employee dressed in a pig mask. The horror in a lot of the stories I read start with a small creeping sense of unease. Well, sometimes the real creeping dread comes from something we ignore: our health, like a nagging ache, a weird symptom, or just the stress of keeping up with everything. I recently found myself putting off a doctor's visit with the usual excuse that maybe it'll go away and I'll wait till tomorrow to call. That's where ZocDoc swooped in and made things simple. It's a free website where you can search and compare in-network doctors, filter by specialty, check actual appointment openings, and book instantly, often within 24 to 72 hours. You can look at verified patient reviews, read doctor profiles, and pick someone who feels like the right fit for you. No long phone calls or guessing games. For me, I was able to pick a doctor who literally had availability the next day, and whose reviews mentioned patients feeling heard. That was important because when you walk into an appointment, you want someone who gets you, not someone you can't connect with. So if you've been putting off seeing a doctor, feeling unsure of where to start, or just want someone you feel good about walking into their office or video call, go check out ZocDoc.com/MR.SHADOW and find a doctor that fits you. This happened to me on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago. The reason I remember it was Thanksgiving Day was because I was sick with a respiratory virus that was going around at the time. On Thanksgiving, I was past the fever and contagious part. I just had body chills and could not go 5 seconds without coughing, and I could barely speak. At the time, I had promised a friend/sea coworker who would be out of town for the holidays that I would watch her cat, as her cat is older and needs medicine every day. I agreed since she lives a short walk away from where we work. I agreed before I got sick, but I couldn't go back on my promise. I was also talking to a friend about how both of us wanted to go play tennis and bowling at some point since we both played in high school. I had kept my tennis rackets and bowling ball at my father's place since the dorm I lived in was extremely small. I live in a big city to go to college and therefore did not have a car, as I used public transportation to get around. Because I was sick during Thanksgiving, I was unable to get back to my father's place for Thanksgiving, but I was extremely determined to get my tennis rackets and bowling balls since I only go back to my father's place a couple times a year. So if I didn't get my things on Thanksgiving, it would be another few months before we could play. And so I was stubborn and dead set on getting my things. I had made a plan in my head. I would walk to the light rail and get off on a station closer to where my father lives. Then ask my brother to come and bring me the stuff that I wanted. On the way home, I would get off the light rail and take the bus to my friend's place to check in on her cat and make sure she was taking her medicine. The transit system where I live is still very irregular. As I was waiting for the bus to come and take me to my friend's place on Apple Maps, my phone would keep saying that the bus was 1 minute away just for it to not show up. And then I'd refresh it, and it would say the next bus comes in 15 minutes. I would have just walked to her place, and she lives not too far from the light rail station. But for context, at the time I was a 19-year-old female about 53, and I was carrying a 13-lb bowling ball, a couple tennis rackets, and some Thanksgiving leftovers along with being sick. I had been waiting for over 30 minutes for the bus to come, and since it was about 9:00 p.m. on Thanksgiving, the bus stop was empty and I was the only one there. As I was waiting, a car pulled up with a group of men who looked like they were in their early to mid-20s. They were speaking another language and laughing. I assumed they were just friends dropping someone off at the station. After a few minutes, one of the men got out and the car drove off. The station was pretty big, and I stood a little away from the actual bus stop since I was coughing a lot and didn't want to be near anyone. Despite that, the man walked over and sat on the bench directly next to me. I didn't think much of it at first. I just stared at my phone, watching the bus arrival time constantly change, and kept leaning out to look down the street for the bus headlights. A couple minutes passed, and then I suddenly felt something on my shoulder. The man had gotten up and wrapped his arm tightly around me. My mind went completely blank. I was so confused and startled that I just froze up. After a moment, he mumbled something like asking if I was okay. I quietly said that I was fine and just waiting for the bus. A couple minutes later, he let go and sat back down. Red flags were going off, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he heard me coughing and thought I didn't feel well. Or maybe he saw me leaning out to look for the bus and thought something was wrong. I knew those excuses were stupid, but I was trying to keep myself calm. People might be wondering why I didn't run or yell, but this man was well over 6 feet tall and easily twice my weight. He was also wearing one of those bandana-style face coverings. It was odd, but this was near the end of CO, so some people still wore them, and we were completely alone at the bus stop. I didn't want to provoke him. A few minutes later, he got up again and put his arm around me a second time, sometimes even stroking my back. Luckily, I was wearing a thick puffer jacket. I saw my bus approaching and just stayed still, thinking everything would be over once I got on. When the bus got close, I slipped out of his grip and quietly said something like, "My bus is here." He said something in response that made it clear he planned to follow me onto the bus. I know I should have told the driver, but I could barely talk without coughing, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before, so I was panicking. When I got on the bus, I stood up on purpose. Because of his size, I knew he'd have to sit, and if I sat first, he would sit next to me. Once he wasn't looming over me, I messaged a friend and tried to figure out what to do. I considered calling the police, but knew he would hear me, and I didn't know if he had a weapon. While I was stuck under his grip earlier, I was already planning what to do if he followed me. I knew I couldn't go to my friend's place. I also couldn't shake the thought that the group of men who dropped him off might be involved in something with him. The stop before my friend's place was the stop for work. I worked at a restaurant inside a large outdoor shopping center. It was around 9:30 p.m. Even though all the stores closed at 9:00, I knew the entire center had security and cameras everywhere. I also knew my co-workers would still be there finishing closing duties. The only downside was the locked front door, but the back employee entrance would be open. To get in through the back, I'd need to go through the outdoor trash room enclosure first, then punch in the code on the door. When the bus reached my stop, the man got off right with me and immediately grabbed my shoulder again, gripping even tighter. I had to take tiny steps. I didn't want to suddenly sprint and alert him if I wasn't close enough to make it inside in time. As we got closer to work, all I could think about was whether I'd be fast enough to break away and get through both doors before he caught me. Thankfully, when he approached the back entrance, the door to the trash enclosure was propped open, and one of the chefs and a coworker were standing there talking with the back door held open. I used that moment. His grip had released just slightly from walking, and I slipped out of it and ran past him. I tried to tell my coworker that a man was following me and to shut the door. Even though I could barely talk, he closed it right away. Not even 2 seconds later, the handle started rattling violently, and he started banging on the door. I explained as best I could that I didn't know him and that he followed me from the bus stop. We called mall security. While we waited, we could see the man pacing around the restaurant through the windows. After a couple of minutes, he walked into the ice cream shop directly across from us. Security arrived and asked me a few questions. The coworker who had been at the door ended up driving me to my friend's place so I could check on her cat, and then she drove me home. A few days later, my manager told me that mall security wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I said I wasn't sure yet, and that I mostly wanted to know the man's name and what he claimed he was doing there. But my manager never followed up, and I never heard anything again. To this day, I have no idea what that man wanted, though I definitely have my suspicions. I honestly forgot about the whole thing until recently, when my same friend asked me again if I could watch her cat for Thanksgiving. That's what brought all of this back. This happened in early December 2 years ago, when I drove up into the mountains to visit an old friend I had not seen in a long time. His fictional name for the story is Scott, and my real name is Jeremy. We had been friends since middle school, but after graduation, he moved out to a small mountain town with his family. Over the years, we slowly drifted apart. I stayed in New York City for work, and he stayed up in the mountains. We never fought or anything. We just stopped keeping up with each other's lives. So when he reached out to me out of nowhere and said I should come visit for a weekend, it made me feel kind of nostalgic and excited. He said it was the best time to come up because the snow added to the rustic rural vibe. I figured it would be fun to catch up. The drive up the mountain was extra long because I drove a bit slower due to icy conditions. There were barely any other cars on the road, and the sun went down around 400 p.m. since it was December, and by the time I reached the area where he was living, it was already pitch black. He lived in one of those older wooden houses on the side of the mountain. There were only a few scattered houses nearby, all spaced out far from each other. He lives in a good area for skiing. If only I could ski. When I pulled into his driveway and he came outside to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something about him felt off or just different. I hadn't seen him in years, so I figured maybe I just forgot what he looked like and acted like. But the way he talked was different, slower than he used to talk. And he kept pausing between sentences like he forgot what he was saying. He helped carry my bag inside, and the inside of the house was warm but pretty empty. Not much furniture except for a couch, a table, a couple chairs, and some antique-looking wall decor. He told me I could sleep on the couch for the weekend since it folded into a pull-out bed. I told him that was fine. The house had a long, dark hallway across from the couch that led to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms, which he explained were empty because this used to be his grandparents' house, and they recently passed away. He told me he lived alone here now. The hallway had no light at the end, and the doors were all open, so from the couch, all I could see was this pitch-black rectangle stretching into the back of the house. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable, even though there was nothing obviously scary about it. That first night, we talked a little bit about old times, but it felt strange. His general demeanor and mannerisms were more socially awkward now, but I chalked it up to the fact that living alone in the mountains for years could make anyone a bit weird. He barely made eye contact, and I did feel like he kept looking in the direction of the hallway. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom, and I got the couch set up. I left a light near the hallway on because the dark made me nervous. I felt stupid about it, but the hallway really bothered me. I fell asleep, but at around 2:00 in the morning, I woke up to a thumping sound from upstairs. I quickly realized there were fast footsteps running across the floor above me. It sounded like someone sprinting from one end of the room to the other, then stopping and then sprinting again. The footsteps went on for about 20 seconds before just stopping completely. I waited to hear a door open or close or anything, but there was complete silence after that. I eventually fell back asleep, even though I was pretty creeped out after that. The second day was even weirder. Scott acted distracted the entire day, barely talking, barely eating, and whenever I asked if he was feeling okay, he would just nod without saying anything. I didn't understand why he was acting this way, being that he invited me here for the weekend for what I assumed was to catch up and rekindle our friendship. I also counted him going down that hallway at least 5 times throughout the day, and I never bothered to check what he was looking at. Since there was a bathroom at the end of the hall, I just presumed he was going in there, even though I never heard a flush. That night, the weather got worse and a snowstorm rolled through. Wind slammed against the house hard enough to make the walls shake a little. It was awesome. Honestly, I love the vibe of being snowed in a cozy place. I went to the couch and scrolled on my phone for like an hour, then went to sleep. Around 2:00 in the morning, I woke up again. This time I heard soft scraping sounds. They were coming from downstairs somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the wooden floor. Then it just stopped. But then there was a sudden tap on the wall behind me, like someone had flicked it with their finger. I turned and looked down the hallway. I didn't leave that light on that night, so it was completely dark. I didn't want to get up. I did my best to just roll to the other side and block the noises out. Old house, I kept telling myself. I did fall back asleep, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. The third night was the worst. By this time, I felt uneasy in the house in general, and I kept catching Scott staring at me for too long without saying anything, like he was checking if I noticed something. I almost thought about leaving early, but the snowstorm was supposed to last until morning. After dinner, Scott went upstairs early, and I stayed up on my phone, starting to question the point of this visit entirely. Eventually, I set up the couch and laid down. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but sometime around 2:00 in the morning again, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, but the rest of my body refused to move. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it. It was like being awake inside a dead body. I could only move my eyes. I couldn't even move my fingers. I started to panic, but then something made it even worse. I noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if it was real or not. But after a few seconds, I realized what I was seeing. Scott was standing at the very end of the hallway. I could only see his outline because his face was completely hidden in the darkness. His arms hung at his sides, and he was standing perfectly still, like he'd been there for a long time just watching me. It was like a scene from Paranormal Activity. I tried to speak to him, but no sound came out. I tried to move or twitch or anything, but my body stayed frozen. I didn't even feel like I was breathing, to be honest. I could only stare. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, not moving at all. Then, without warning, he slowly turned to his right and walked into the guest room at the end of the hall. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. My body slowly started to regain control. First my fingers, then my arms, then my ability to sit up. Once I fully snapped out of it, I sat up shaking and sweating. I kept telling myself it might have just been a dream or a hallucination, since sleep paralysis can cause that. But something in my gut said it wasn't. I whispered his name to see if he would answer. Nothing. Against everything in me, I got up and forced myself to walk down the hallway toward the room he had gone into. When I stepped inside, the room looked empty, but in the far corner by the window, someone was standing. I could see the shape of a person facing the window looking outside. I couldn't tell if it was Scott. Either way, the sight was horrifying. I slowly backed out and then ran upstairs to his bedroom. I found Scott asleep in his bed, completely knocked out. I shook him awake, and he looked confused and irritated, like he had no idea why I was waking him up. When I tried to tell him what I saw, he refused to go downstairs. I begged him to believe me that someone else was in the house. He would not even look toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed in a way that scared me even more. He looked like he already knew what I had seen. I then asked him firmly, "Scott, who is that downstairs?" and he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. At that point, I decided I was done. I didn't care about the snow or the time. I ran downstairs and grabbed my bag to pack my stuff. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see that person standing there again. Genuinely, I just wanted to teleport out of that house immediately. When I got outside, the cold air almost relieved me. I brushed snow off my car and got inside as fast as possible. As I backed out of the driveway, I made the mistake of looking up at the house one last time. In that window of the room at the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. Surely that same person I saw standing in that room just before. That was the last thing I ever saw of Scott's house. After that weekend, he stopped responding to texts. I threatened to call in a wellness check when I got worried that he got murdered or something. And finally, he responded saying, "I'm fine." That's it, though. He didn't respond to any further texts, so I stopped bothering. That was not the same Scott I knew from school. Whatever happened to him, and whoever that was in his house, it's not my problem. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't terrify the out of me, though.